I'd like to give what is hopefully a very practical example of how yoga helps us to control and gradually develop from a very, very distracted mind to a very, very focused and concentrated mind. So if we take the example of sitting in meditation, whether you've been meditating for a day or for a few months or for many, many years, what we all know is that when we sit to meditate, our minds get distracted. We start to think about the things that we prefer to be doing in that moment of time. We start to think about the things that we'd like to eat, about the people that we'd like to speak to, about the people that we don't want to speak to. We start fantasizing about all sorts of life scenarios that have happened or things that may occur in the future. And before we know it, we have become completely lost in a web of thought. And then maybe at some point, we suddenly realize, oh, hang on a minute, I meant to be sitting here meditating. Oh yes, I meant to be focusing on my breath or whatever it is. And we gradually bring ourselves back. And those of you that meditate know that one of the fundamental practices is that you have an anchor or an object of attention. And that whenever you notice, that's key, notice that your mind has wandered. In that noticing, you realize, oh, okay, I'm not on the object. And then you gently let go of whatever the mind has wandered towards, and you bring your attention back into the object of attention. Now, the question is, why is that beneficial beyond the period in which we are actually meditating? Well, the reality is that in most of our waking lives, we're not present. Our minds are somewhere else. We might be in front of someone, but we're thinking about something that happened earlier on. We're thinking about an appointment that we had later on in the day. Our minds are constantly distracted. But more important still is the fact that without controlling the mind or without knowing how to coax the mind into a certain pattern, we can find, if we are that way inclined, that our mind starts to wander into negative thoughts. It starts to wander into worrying about certain things. It starts to worry about things that are going to happen in the future. It might start to drift into thoughts that start to cause anxiety, which we feel physiologically as well as psychologically. And really all that's happening in that moment or in those moments is that we are allowing our mind to move into those narratives, to move into connection with that mental chatter. And because perhaps if we've not meditated or done any yoga practice, we've never understood that there is a possibility that when that happens, we can draw our mind away from it into something which connects us into the present moment. We simply just let the mind continue to play out these thoughts. And as a result of that, we get an increase in worry, an increase in negativity, an increase in anxiety, or it might be an increase in rage or anger or jealousy, whatever it might be, but we just give the mind free rein and it runs and it stays there. And before we know it, we've spent hours involved in thinking about negative things, which of course are only going to make us feel worse. So the connection between working with changing the mind so that it doesn't do that and the seated practice that we have in meditation, for example, or even the movement or breath practice that we do within yoga, is that the constant underpinning practice in any yogic technique is noticing when the mind has wandered away, when the mind has become distracted, when the mind has become involved or engaged in these negative thought patterns. They don't have to be negative, by the way, but any thought pattern that isn't the object we're supposed to be focusing on. And time again, we keep bringing our attention back. We keep noticing when the mind has wandered, and we keep doing that dance. What happens over time is a couple of things. First of all, we become more adept at doing the noticing of when our mind has wandered. So rather than perhaps allowing our mind to languish in a certain thought pattern for, let's say, 10 minutes, we begin to notice after 9 minutes, just as an example. It might be 5 minutes and then it's 4, or it might be a few seconds and we notice with even quicker awareness that our mind has wandered. But basically what we're doing is we're becoming better at noticing, yes, there is a place I'm trying to focus, and now my mind is elsewhere. So we gradually get better at noticing, oh, okay, my mind's wandered. I need to bring it back. On the other hand, though, what we're also doing is we are cultivating these samskaras, or these latent impressions in our mind, which allow our mind naturally to rest in a more one-pointed or focused state for longer and longer periods of time. So on one hand, we're noticing more quickly and more effectively when the mind is wandering. But then on the other hand, we're creating a pattern of stability in the mind because we practice over and over again. And the mind naturally begins to stay in one direction more naturally according to its own energy. So the combination of those two things means that over time, as we develop our practice, we begin to create change, parinama, within the activities of the mind so that they gradually start to move into a more stable state. Now, the benefit of that to what you might call our psychological well-being is that that pattern doesn't just stay with us on the mat. What we notice actually is that when we go out into our daily lives, that our minds are equally, if not more, subject to meandering and wandering and becoming engrossed and entrenched in these narratives which may not always be helpful to us. But because we've been training that mind muscle on the mat, we begin to notice more and more quickly a couple of things. One, yes, my mind has wandered, but also two, when my mind is wandering in that direction, and when I'm thinking those thoughts, when I'm absorbed in that way of thinking and relating to the content of my mind, I actually don't feel so great. My breath is getting faster or shorter or more shallow. My body starts to tense up. Maybe I need to fidget more. And we begin to equate what we're paying attention to in our minds with our psychological and physiological well-being. And as a result of noticing the fact that we're becoming agitated and noticing the fact that we are dwelling on these things which are perhaps not beneficial for us, that muscle memory, if you like, that mind memory that we've been building up in our practice kicks in and draws our attention away, maybe back to the breath, maybe just seeing the scene in front of us and just engaging with it in a deeper and fuller way in that moment. And gradually over time, we can start to apply that to all manner of thoughts, all manner of idea, no matter how powerful they are, particularly the ones that usually have the power to completely knock us away from balance and to have us worrying for many, many minutes or hours or even days. Meditation gives us the ability to understand when the mind has been triggered into that space and to have the tools and the techniques to be able to bring the mind back, and then also to be able to establish a new groove which allows it to rest more fully in a chosen direction rather than being hijacked into the trance of what we might call unconscious thought. And that is why really we must always remind ourselves that the fundamental practice and aim and goal of yoga at the bottom line is this transformation, this parinama of the mind, change of the mind into a more one-pointed and stable groove rather than a distracted groove. And of course, in this modern age, I really feel that there is no greater natural medicine for our ills and woes and for the distracted society that we live in through our phones, through our computers, through the fast-paced lives that we all lead, is actually a practice where we tune out from all of that stuff. We really gather ourselves inwards and we begin to develop this one-pointedness, because then when we go out into the world inevitably and engage with it, we can do all of those things. But in between those moments, we are gathering ourselves back. We are connecting to that space within, and we are keeping a balance through this more stable mind. And we notice when our mind is spending more time than perhaps it should or that we might want in these unhealthy places or with these unbalancing narratives that continue to flow in our minds. So I think that's about it for today. Hopefully that gives us a different perspective on what it means to relate to this idea of parinama and the power that yoga associates and gives us to be able to notice our minds and take them in new, more balancing and healthy directions. So as always, thank you for joining. I hope you found this video useful, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon. Namaste.